If you've clicked on the thumbnail wondering what on earth I'm talking about, Kasrkin are awesome, what do you mean they're finally fixed? Then welcome fellow Warhammer 40,000 enjoyer, you might be a little bit lost. This is a kill team video. After months of speculation about what the new Kill Team Balance update could contain, and following the awesome Adepticon reveals last week, Kill Team players have been wondering just where the balance data slate was. There's a lot to dig into, there's been a lot of changes across the board, so let's get into it. So one of the major updates to competitive Kill Team last year was the introduction of the Critical Operations card pack, which revamped the way match-played Kill Team was played, at least in tournament circles. Which is a bit of a shame for most of the community, these cards might as well not exist due to how hard it is to get hold of them legally. Despite this, they've generally been well received by those who did manage to get a copy. However, there were some rumblings in the community that some of the missions were probably not quite as well designed as they first appeared, and that more and more games were resulting in draws, with tiebreakers really being down to tactical ops. This is something Games Workshop has noticed as well. To try and combat this, they've raised the maximum victory point cap from 12 to 16 so that more points can be scored from the mission itself. This is still capped at a maximum of 4 points a turn, and I've not played the Critical Operations pack, so I can't comment for myself whether this will be a sufficient change, so let me know what you think in the comments. Now, before we move on to discussing the changes to the many bespoke teams, it's worth pointing out that no changes have been made to the Compendium teams with this update. To me, this further signals that Games Workshop is pretty much done with the Compendium at this point. While yes, there is an argument to be made for this as there's more than enough bespoke teams to choose from, the fact of the matter is, some of the major factions, including somewhat bizarrely Tyranids, are still lacking a bespoke team. I'm a fan of the Compendium teams, and personally I feel they should still get a little more support, but truth be told, Compendium teams at this point are not really meant to compete with bespoke teams, which is what ultimately Kill Team is going to be about. The first bespoke team to receive an adjustment were the Orc Commandos. The Orc Commandos are no longer the kings they once were, and while they're not doing too horribly, they are struggling a little bit. As such, they've been given a small but very surprising update. If you select the Commando Grot or the Commando Squig, you now get the other operative included for free, so you have a total of 11 operatives, not 10. This is awesome. I love the Commando Squig model, but honestly there was never a real reason to take it. Being able to include it for free whenever you would take the ever useful Commando Grot is a nice little bonus, and I look forward to actually seeing the Squig on the table. We will have to see if this is enough to improve the Commando some, but it's a welcome change regardless. The Legionaries, at least Nurgle-aligned Legionaries, have finally seen the nerf the community has been expecting for a while, although it's surprisingly minor. Damage reduction rules as a whole have been made less good across multiple kill teams to stop punishing the teams with lower damage output. With the Legionaries, the mutagenic flesh ploy still reduces damage by 1, but now only to a minimum of 3 instead of a minimum of 2. I'm not sure if this is enough to prevent Nurgle teams being the boring default choice for competitive Legionaries, but it's a start. I'd personally like to see some of the other marks made more of an attractive choice at the same time, but overall, the Legionaries remain in a pretty good spot. The Voidscarred are definitely one of the highest skill teams to play, but overall, Games Workshop are happy with their performance. They've received a tiny buff just to make their gear consistent with the hand of the Archon team, who have a better version of the same gun. The Voidscarred Gunner Shredder has gained the Rending critical hit rule. The Phobos have a bit of a maligned history with Kill Team, as they were the first Space Marine team to receive bespoke rules, but unlike most Space Marines in Games Workshop's games, they require high levels of skill and finesse to do well. As a team that relies a lot on its action economy, they've been struggling in games where you have to do a lot of mission actions, such as games of Into the Dark. To that end, they've received the following small buff. When the Vanguard strategic ploy is played, in addition to the usual bonuses such as automatically passing jump tests, ignoring the first 2 inches of distance for climbs, drops and traverses, and of course the super useful extra inch to movement, you can now perform the mission action or the pickup action for 1 less action points to a minimum of 0. This should definitely help the Phobos with their playstyle in games of Into the Dark in particular. Unsurprisingly, the Gellerpox infected have been continuing to dominate despite already receiving a minor nerf in the past. Games Workshop are generally happy with how they're doing, so it seems this new nerf is a minor one and only to one specific operative, Vulgar Thrice Cursed. His Lead the Infection ability, which allows you to gain a command point if he is standing within 2 inches of an objective marker, can now only be done once per game. Moving on to the Gellerpox's natural foes, the Eleusinian Starstriders, this team went from being an underperforming one to one which is now way overperforming following their previous buff. These buffs have now been toned down somewhat, and the only changes to their rules now from the annual are as follows. The Electromeister's Voltigeist field and charge actions remain 0 action points. The Archaeotech Beam Privateer support asset has its ballistic skill improved by 1, and finally, the Undaunted Explorer's strategic ploy means the first time a Starstrider operative fights in combat or a shoot attack is made against it, damage is halved to a minimum of 2. Note that now this is only done the first time it occurs when the ploy is played, not each time. Other than that, they are as presented as in the annual. The Imperial Navy breachers have been having a good time with it recently, and as the saying goes, woe betide thee whose chosen kill team does well with tournaments, for the sacred nerf hammer shall fall upon thine head. Here are the nerfs. The Blitz tactical ploy has been nerfed so that if you choose to do either of its 2 abilities, you cannot reroll any of the remaining attack dice. The Navis Grenadier can no longer use frag and crack grenades twice, despite the original intention of his ability being designed to get around that limit. He can now only throw them once per game, bringing him into line with the rest of the other kill teams at the cost of what made them a little bit unique. Finally, as we've seen with other teams, the damage reduction rule, specifically in this case, brace for counterattack, has been nerfed to reduce incoming damage to 3 instead of 2. The Intercession squad has seen a minor nerf, much like the Legionaries. Unsurprisingly, it's to durable, to bring it in line with the other damage reduction nerfs seen in this balanced data slate. Durable now only reduces incoming damage to a minimum of 3, instead of a minimum of 2. Do you think this will be enough to stop Durable being an auto choice for a lot of players? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The list of buffs for the Necrons is quite extensive. The previous buffs of making the Commence Reanimation tactical ploy cost 0 AP, as well as the Phase Oculus action cost 0 AP, remain. But in addition, Reanimation protocols now cause operatives to regain D3 plus 3 wounds instead of just 3 in the original rules. That reanimated operative can now be placed within 3 inches of the reanimation token instead of as close as possible to it, and now that operative can actually be given any order of your choice. This is very different and much better than the original incarnation. Both of the little plasmacytes have been buffed. The Plasmacyte Accelerator's acceleration action is 0 AP, and you can now select an operative within 6 inches instead of 3, which is pretty significant. And as for the Plasmacyte Reanimator, well, their reanimation beam no longer subtracts 1 from its action point limit when it's used. The Cryptech, Despotech and Apprentech have been improved. They increased their weapon skills and ballistic skill by 1, but they've now also gained 2 wounds. The Cryptech's command action and Despotech's demand action cost 0 AP now, and crucially, Cryptech actions now last longer. Instead of actions which specified lasting until the end of the turning point, ending at that point, they now actually last until the start of the operative's next activation. These are all huge, very welcome changes, and I'm really keen to get this squad now painted up and see what they're capable of on the table. Having said that, whilst these changes are welcome, this is a large list of updates rendering their printed rules pretty much obsolete, and it's another example of maybe Games Workshop really needing to go to an online-only digital rule set if they're going to make so many changes to teams in the future. And finally, we have the Kasrkin. The Kasrkin, according to the data, aren't doing as badly as perhaps people were expecting, but they do need some help. So Games Workshop have given them 3 smaller buffs which combined should make a fair bit of difference. The first change is that each of the operatives have had their wounds characteristics increased by 1. Now, this isn't a huge change, but it should increase the chances of having operatives just being able to hang on to dear life, and it brings them closer in line with the Tempestus Scions. The second change is that elite points, as a team ability, now automatically add 2 elite points to the elite points pool every strategy phase. This means combined with the Sergeant's ability, if of course they're still alive, the Kasrkin team can now generate 4 elite points each turn. This is pretty significant. I'm looking forward to seeing how this pans out. In the last battle report on this channel, thanks to a strategic asset in our narrative campaign, I was able to start the battle with 3 extra elite points, and I really felt the difference. I can only imagine what having access to an extra 2 to 4 points per turn will feel like. Finally, the Kasrkin have now been given access to a new piece of equipment, the Combat Blade. It's pretty cheap as equipment goes, it's only 1 equipment point, and it doesn't actually make them good in combat, but it will make them suck less as it increases the damage characteristic they do from 2/3 to 3/4. You still absolutely don't want your Kasrkin ending up in combat, but this is probably a good choice for some operatives, as this team is best played when moving up the board, so invariably some of them are going to end up in combat. I'm definitely going to be giving this a go. So 3 relatively small changes, but interesting ones as far as they go. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how they perform following this update. So there we have it, the biggest balance update to Kill Team yet. How do you feel about these changes in general? Let me know in the comments and we'll get a conversation started. For the most part, I like a lot of these changes, particularly for the Kasrkin, and I'm excited to see what they'll do for the game in general. Of course, on the flip side, you can argue that Kill Team is becoming more unwieldy as a game as more and more key changes are being made to the rules and the teams in general. And whilst it's not quite 40k levels of bad, there's definitely been an increase in the different rules you have to double check to clarify whether or not they've been changed, which is always a downside to a live game. I think it's unlikely Games Workshop will ever swap to a fully digital rule set, at least not for a long while yet, but what it could potentially mean is that at some point in the future, Kill Team will see a new edition, which rather than being a completely new experience, will simply be a tidy up edition, similar to what we saw recently with Warcry. What do you reckon? What do you think is more likely? Click like if you liked the video, hit subscribe if you want to see more, and if you really like what you see, consider supporting us on Patreon for early access to some of our videos, as well as other perks and benefits such as access to our private Discord server, and exclusive behind the scenes videos for our Interrogator tier and above supporters. We'll see you all next time.